Jesus said, I have all authority and I'm giving that to you. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, he is actually entrusting his authority and his power to us as human beings through his Spirit. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about that's dangerous power, but we can wield it because of him, because he never wielded it poorly and wrongly. So there's this interesting dance. We have a lot more authority and power than we know we have, and it's a good thing.
Hi, friends. This is Scott Allen, president of the Disciple Nations Alliance, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences, the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. As we prepare to launch my newest book, 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World, Restoring the True Meaning of Our Most Important Words, we wanted to go through each one of these 10 foundational words that are highlighted in the book, discussing their true meaning, as well as how they've been fundamentally redefined in our contemporary culture. Now, you might be asking, why do words matter? Well, it's because words and definitions shape the way we think and feel, and that in turn determines our choices and our actions. And that shapes the kind of culture that we live in, for better or for worse. And so, if you want to work for a positive change in culture, in society, it has to begin by restoring the true meaning of our most important words.
Hi friends, my name's Luke, and welcome to the 141st episode of Ideas Have Consequences. And for this mini-series specifically, we are on episode 7 of the 10 Words to Heal Our Broken Worlds series. So thanks for joining us along for this series as we are unpacking the upcoming book, 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World. For today's episode, I'm joined by my co-host, Dwight Vogt.
Hi.
Hey, Dwight. And our acting guest for today's show is my dad and the author of the new book, Scott Allen. And again, the title of the book is 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World, Restoring the True Meanings of Our Most Important Words. And those words are truth, human, sex, marriage, freedom, authority, justice, faith, beauty, and love. And as we've done with each of these words so far, and you'll hear us do today as we lay them out, you'll hear us lay out the true and the false definitions of this word, the true definition being that which is defined in the Bible and God's Word, and then the false one is usually the most commonly used definition that we hear in many of our cultures today, and yet it's distorted and it's false, and for that reason, my dad decided to write this book. And then we'll go on to talk about how each of those definitions creates a culture and what those cultures look like depending on the definition. And I know for some of us, for myself, when I first heard that statement, words create cultures, it left a big question mark in my head. But as you guys heard during the introduction, the way you define a word, because often we think in words, will shape your thinking. And then your thinking will shape the way you feel oftentimes. And then, of course, that, your thinking and your feelings, will shape your actions and choices. And those, in turn, will shape the lives that you live, and collectively, the lives that we live in culture. So the words that we use, the way we define them in our minds, can shape culture. And that is definitely true with today's word. I know for myself, when I first read through, Dad, your list of those 10 words, and the ones that you chose for this book, obviously you could do a lot more than 10 words. There's been a lot of words that have been redefined from God's original meanings, but you narrowed it down to 10, and this word to me, when I saw it, I was like, interesting. I wouldn't have expected that one to make it on the list. The words like love, truth, justice, those made total sense, but this one, I was just a little bit confused when I saw this one on the list. But the more I thought about it, for me, this word and faith probably were the two that I had the most wrong definition in my mind of. I had adopted the false definition much more than I realized. So learning about this one's been super helpful, and I hope it is for everyone listening to this episode today, because it not only is an important word to understand on its own, but it really affects a lot of these other definitions. The word we're going to be talking about today is authority. And if you get authority wrong, you get a lot of things wrong. I realized it's hard to have the right understanding of marriage as God defines it. It's hard to have the right understanding of freedom, like we talked about last week, as God defines it. So authority really matters, God's biblical definition. And as we hear in a minute, it's been redefined. So, Dad, just to get us started today, why don't we just read the two definitions, the biblical one and then the false definition of authority?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Right out the chute, we're going to give these concise definitions, and these are, of course, ones that we developed. I developed, so, this is my best understanding. So, take it with a grain of salt. But here's how I concisely defined true authority. It's the power or the right to issue commands, rules, laws, and ensure that they're carried out. Human authority is delegated from God, who is the supreme authority, and it is accountable to him. When properly exercised, authority creates conditions in which people thrive by providing wise leadership in a context of ordered liberty. Jesus, as our model for authority in practice, sacrificially serves those under his authority for their good. So again, long. There's a lot to this, and we'll get into that. There's a lot of really, really important facets to this. This is a really rich word and concept. But today, this word authority has been. It's not so much that it's been redefined. It has, but it's the way I would describe it is it's been secularized. In other words, in our secular world in the West. Or it could be actually any culture that denies God, that doesn't know God, the true God, and his Son, Jesus Christ. They don't know him. So this could be true even of an ancient animistic culture, or our modern West, which is post-Christian. So, you have a completely different understanding of authority, and here's how I describe that redefined authority. It is an arbitrary, self-serving, and often harsh and oppressive use of power and control. It's a concentration of power in a human government or rule that is unaccountable to God or constitutional limits or the people that are under authority. So those very different concepts, same word, different ideas.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Wow. Yeah, those are, especially the first one. I was expecting a few words, and it's like a 5-sentence definition. So, and I also
that
appreciate
doesn't get at it, but yeah.
Yeah, I also appreciate, Scott. I think our listeners are observing this, that we're starting out with a true definition. You insisted on doing that, and I think that's powerful in itself. Just starting with truth instead of starting with chapter 3 of Genesis. We're starting with Genesis 1 and saying, here's what's true, here's what's gone wrong. So that's great. But let's go ahead, unpack it, Scott. Tell us, what are the key aspects of that true definition, and just unpack it for us.
Yeah, there's just layer upon layer of richness and beauty, And I know that's kind of funny to say because we tend to think of authority negatively. I know I did, question authority and people that have authority or power, and those are very closely related words. We could get into that. Should be viewed very suspiciously. Anyways, but the biblical concept is actually really rich and very beautiful. At its core is, the way I start out here is it is power. It's a power or a right to issue commands or rules or laws and to ensure that they're obeyed. I could have said this as well. It's a power or a right to punish wrongdoing as well. So authority comes with the power to punish injustice. So that's the core of it. That really is the very center of it. The next thing I would say is that authority originates with God himself. He's the supreme authority because he created the heavens and the earth. So all authority, begins with and comes from God and his son Jesus. And that's why when Jesus was here, right after the resurrection, when he met with his disciples in Galilee, he said, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me." And just let me pause quickly on that word "all." That means authority over all, okay, over everything. That includes power over the created order. When Jesus was here, he gave orders to the wind and the waves, and they were still, right? So it's power over that. It's power over all human authority and power, over kings and rulers, no matter how powerful. They're not as powerful as Jesus. It's power. It's authority over Satan, actually. So Jesus has power. Satan does nothing outside of God's will or choosing. He has authority over the evil. He has authority over all. So that's so important. That authority comes from God and His Son Jesus. Then the next thing to notice is that it's delegated. This God delegates authority, and we see this right away in Genesis chapter 1, where He creates man in His image, and He delegates power and authority to him. He says, I give you the right to rule. I give you the authority to rule over creation. And this delegated authority, there's a humility to this. So, and you even see this in God saying to Adam, you name the animals, whatever you name them, I'll call them. Just to contrast this with fallen, in our fallen world, authority is typically not delegated. It's centralized, right? But in God's economy, He delegates authority, and He spreads it out, and He shares it. There's this humility to that. So human authority comes from God. That's so important to say. We as human beings don't have authority in and of ourselves. It all comes from God, and it's accountable to God. And God establishes particular types of human authority, okay? He defines human authority. So He says, fathers, you have authority in your home. He defines human authorities and the limits on human authority, by the way. So He says, fathers, you have authority in your home with your children and with your wife, too. There is a headship authority there, but it's only in your home, and it's only with your wife and your children. That's the limits of it. There's authority for the church that belongs to elders. There's authority in the state that belongs to civil authorities. They have the God-given right, if you will, to issue commands, rules, laws, and to punish wrongdoing. Teachers have that authority in the classroom, and you could go on as well. There's legitimate human authority, but it all comes from God, and it's accountable to God. And we should be looking as well to delegate authority. In other words, we should be following God's example and not seeking to centralize authority in ourselves, but to say, how can we share that authority with those under us? So that's the next thing I'd say. Then the third thing I would say here is that authority exists, and this is really the revolutionary part of it, that it exists for the good or the service of those under authority. It is not in any way self-seeking or self-aggrandizing. It exists in order to serve. And you see this most powerfully with Jesus Himself, right? He said, I didn't come to serve, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many, even though He's the supreme authority. And you see this in particular with that famous exchange that happens on the road to Jerusalem, the last trip to Jerusalem that He takes with His disciples, where they're arguing amongst themselves for positions of power in what they imagine will be Christ's worldly kingdom. He's going to kick the Romans out. He's going to establish His kingdom, and they want positions of power. They want to be, the vice president and the secretary of state. It's not they say, we want to sit at your right hand, so to speak. And then Jesus says, He essentially corrects them, and He says, you've got this idea of authority in your head, but you've got it wrong. And He says it this way. He says, the way that the rulers of the world exercise authority, and they're powerful men, I think is it exercise authority or rule over. Mm-hmm. And in other words, He's saying, in this fallen world, right? And we all do, right? We all know this, right? We know how authority is exercised. It's exercised to aggrandize and to empower the powerful man or woman at the expense of those under their authority, right? It's abused. He says, that. And then he says, not so with you. This is where he revolutionizes it. He says, whoever wants to be first has to be last. If you want that position of power, if you want greatness in my kingdom, you have to be the last. And if you want to be the great man, you have to be the servant. For even the Son of Man, right, the supreme authority, didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus modeled this in this really revolutionary way, this supreme authority, laying down his life for us, washing his disciples' feet. And yet, as his disciples said, and the people that heard him, they said, he teaches as one who has authority, right? He had this power about him, this authority, because he did, and yet he was, again, think about how he exercised it or how it was displayed. When we think of worldly authority, we think of kings and palaces with royal robes and all sorts of people serving on them and groveling. But Jesus, when he came, the supreme authority, was born in a manger, in this little out-of-the-way place. And he was a carpenter. He wasn't, he didn't display power and authority like we would expect in the fallen world. So he revolutionized it in this way that was not proud or arrogant, but humble, and showed us that authority is to be used or exercised for the good of those under authority. So, anyways, whenever that kind of authority, biblical true authority, has been practiced by Christians who are seeking to follow Jesus' example, whether they're Christian fathers or they're bosses in the workplace or pastors in a church or whatever, it's completely powerful and revolutionary. And you guys know that. You guys have served under those kinds of authorities. We've had the blessing of having, not everyone has, by the way, in our fallen world. Some people have never seen this. They've only seen the false authority. But that's enough for now. That's a lot. But I wanted to just kind of put those big pieces out on the table.
Now that you've done that, Dad, would you mind just reading that definition one more time for everyone?
Yeah, so true authority is the power or right to issue commands, rules, or laws, and to ensure that they're carried out. And again, I could have put here, and to punish wrongdoing or injustice. Human authority is delegated from God, the supreme authority. It's accountable to him. And when it's properly exercised, it creates the conditions where people thrive by providing wise leadership in a context of ordered liberty. Jesus is our model for authority in practice. He sacrificially served those under his authority for their good, and that includes, of course, all of us.
Yeah, that's a hard one, because in my mind, it's still so cemented in that authority means power, and it means lording it over people,
right,
as
right.
Jesus told the disciples. And it's so hard to separate that in my mind, because it feels so ingrained. It's just, we just need to remember, when it comes to authority, selflessness is absolutely necessary. You cannot have biblical authority if you're selfish.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
No.
And to me, it's just, we need to take our whole paradigm of authority for a lot of us and flip it completely upside down.
Totally. Exactly.
The first will be last.
That's the
revolutionary. And we say that, but it's
of it.
really hard to do in your mind, even when we, when these discussions come up.
It's so true, Luke, and I think it's because in the fallen world, and this includes the church. I mean, I have seen the fallen form of authority practiced even in churches or Christian organizations. I hate to say this, but I've seen it practiced more than I have true authority, even in Christian places. So people don't know. I don't think they really know or haven't fully grasped the depth of what genuine authority is, at least not to the level that they're regularly practicing it, right? So...
Hi, friends. I want to tell you real quick about how you can get your hands on an early release copy of this book, 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World. If you're interested, we would like to invite you to sign up for our book launch team. What is the book launch team, you ask? Well, it's an agreement between us and you that, number one, we will send you a free early released copy of this book in October. And then number two, in response, you will read the book and leave us an Amazon review upon its publication date. And if you really want to be a super fan, you can even share the book with a friend. To sign up for the book launch team, head to 10wordsbook.org. Again, that is 10wordsbook.org. Spell that either with the number or TEN. And by the way, as an insider tip, don't wait too long to sign up because there is only 100 spots available on this book launch team. To sum up, the first 100 approved signups will receive an advanced paperback copy of this book by mail, free shipping included. Participants are asked to read the book and prepare a rating and review on Amazon for the release of the book in November. To join, you must be a resident of the United States or Canada and have an active Amazon account. And we can only send one book copy per mailing address. And one last time, the link is 10wordsbook.org, and you can also find that link down in the show notes below.
I think another thread that's woven in here that you've also touched on, Scott, is the thread of what's the purpose of authority, and you've mentioned that. But I think if I think of a good father and a good mother, and they have authority over their children, I say, what's the purpose of their authority? Well, it's to keep them safe. It's to keep those kids safe, and it's to give them the things they need to grow. But basically, it's to ensure that child become everything that God intends for that child to be. So they will sacrifice their lives to get them to dance studios, to get them to math classes, to get them to whatever event, and they'll sacrifice their time. They'll discipline them when it's not pleasant, it's not easy. To have a child that's against you, but you have to stand. They will sacrifice for the well-being of that child. And I think that's almost the most beautiful form of authority that we see is the family parenting authority. But it's true for business. A good businessman, for the sake of his company and for this, he will help his employees succeed.
Yeah, no,
a coach helps his players succeed. If they all succeed, the team succeeds, he succeeds. You know? So that thread is, if you lose that thread, you've lost the reason for authority.
Totally, Dwight, and you're right to carry it all the way to the point of even laying down your life, because that's what Jesus did. Right. You know, I mean, he's our example. He is the example because he's the supreme authority. So he shows us what authority in practice looks like, and it goes that far. And you see this in cultures that have been deeply shaped by the Bible. You know, you can think of any number of examples. One that comes to my mind just right now as I'm talking is the story of the Titanic, right? And here's this ship that's sinking, and there's an authority, there's a hierarchy of authority. That word hierarchy is related here to this discussion, but there's a hierarchy of authority on that ship, and the captain's at the top of that. And but because that culture was so shaped by the Bible, he's going to ensure that those under his authority get on those lifeboats first, and particularly the most vulnerable. I think this is another thing, right? The weakest and the most vulnerable are the ones that the authority is most concerned about. This is true authority. He's going to make sure they're protected, they're saved, and then he's going to give his life if necessary. He's going to be the last one. So that's a picture. There's many others, but those are potent pictures of true authority in practice.
Why do you think that you emphasize too that true authority begins with recognizing God's ultimate authory?
Well, how
is that such a safeguard, or why is that so important? Besides, it's a Christian thing to believe.
Yeah, it's a good question, Dwight. I mean, it's such a prevalent theme in the Bible. I mean, there's these major themes, and the authority of God is obviously, we say things like the lordship of Jesus Christ, or we put it in different ways, but the authority of God is just such an important theme in the Bible. And I think it's important because obviously if authority doesn't reside with God, then it's going to reside somehow on the human plane, right? And we're not going to have any example from God of how we exercise it, and it's going to be exercised in abusive ways, and that's what we see, obviously. So
I think it's interesting. I was thinking of Isaiah, where Isaiah prophesies the coming of the Messiah, and he says one of the things about the Messiah is he will delight in the fear of the Lord. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. He will just delight in the authority of God.
Yes,
the massive, overwhelming, unbelievable, consuming authority of God. He's going to just wow, that makes him happy, you know.
No,
But he understands the power. Anyway.
Yeah, no.
The delight.
We sometimes think of, and I've mentioned Jesus as our example of authority, and we tend to think, well, in the Old Testament, you're talking about Isaiah, God was different, right? He wasn't this humble servant like we see with Jesus. But that's not true. One of the most famous Psalms, Psalm 23, really is a picture of God. He's the shepherd here, and the shepherd has authority over the sheep, right? He's in a position of authority as the shepherd. But it's a picture of how God himself, as the good shepherd, exercises his authority by looking out for the well-being of the sheep, leading them beside water and providing for them and caring for them and even willing to lay down his life for them. This is God himself. This is the heart of God. And David recognized that, and he just thrived in that. The Lord is my shepherd. I just delight in that God is my shepherd. He's this authority in my life,
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. We talked about freedom last week. That episode came out 2 weeks ago now, but we're created to be free. We talked about that.
Yes.
God wants us to be free. Humans flourish inside of true biblical freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for there to be freedom's the ability to do what you ought, there needs to be a structure there, the ability to do the good. What is the good? And there's a structure, there's boundaries, and inside of that, there is true freedom. Outside of that, it's chaos.
Right.
So authority's purpose in human structures and government structures, whatever it looks like, is the authority to keep those boundaries. Like for a parent, you're the one that keeps the boundaries for your child, and inside of those boundaries, your child can flourish and be free.
Yes.
Ultimately, if you get up to the highest levels of human structures, there needs to be something above that in order to keep the boundaries there. So when you're talking about this with someone who's not a Christian, ultimately you get to that question of who holds the boundaries of this world?
Yes.
Who's going to do that?
Yes.
Who's the ultimate authority? If there's nothing, like atheists presume, then everything beneath that's chaos. Because if there's not something holding it together at the top, then every sphere of authority underneath that, as it goes down the ladder, will fall apart. I'm getting a little philosophical here.
No, but I think you're
have to.
Yeah, you're right, Luke. The Bible sets up this, as I mentioned earlier, this concept of authority being shared and delegated and entrusted downward, if you will. In other words, the one that has the supreme authority shares it downward. God shares it with us as image bearers. And then he kind of establishes that principle. We're to share it downwards in a way that entrusts and holds accountable those under our authority. So, ideally, like let's say the civil government in our country, the federal government in the United States, they would ideally, if they're practicing genuine biblical authority, they would recognize the spheres of authority below them that and they would help them to see, they would desire that those spheres of authority flourish, and they would respect those spheres of authority. They would respect, for example, the authority of elders and pastors in their local churches. They would respect the authority of fathers and mothers in the home. But instead, in a fallen world, what you see is you don't see that. You see actually this fear almost of sharing or delegating authority and this concentration of power. I'm going to eliminate, like you hear right now in the United States, we're going to eliminate the family because we don't want to share authority with these lower spheres of authority, if you will. We want in the fallen world, it always moves in the direction of authority or power being concentrated, centralized. But biblically, it's shared. There's this delegation of authority, and this based on trust and the true exercise of this very powerful concept. I think our founding fathers understood that in this country, and that's why they didn't create a centralized federal government. They delegated authority and separated power in all sorts of ways. And I think
they went not overboard, but their understanding of mob. I was just listening to Luke, and you're saying, well, if you could ask the question, well, if it's not God who has ultimate authority, who should? Well, should it be you? Well, no, it shouldn't be me. I'm just a human being. Well, should it be the mob? well, no, I don't want the mob to be my authority. And I think our founders looked at both and said they will fail. The mob fails, so we can't have pure democracy in the sense of no minority representation. And we certainly don't want individual rule. That gives us tyranny and dictators. So you would invent a God if you didn't have, I think that would be people would invent God if he didn't exist, because. But just the fact that, we need a divine, pure, good, wise, ultimate authority over us. And that's God.
Absolutely. And we haven't got onto the cultural, the way that this word, when it's truly understood, creates culture, but it's so powerful, actually. And
well, that's your cues. Go for it, Scott. How does that create culture?
Well, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this too, Dwight. And especially
the good or the bad.
Especially thinking of our experience with Food for the Hungry, because it's this concept of authority being shared and delegated and used for the good of those under authority. It is so uncommon, in the world today. But where it's understood and practiced, it really does become really revolutionary. Some people are bothered, for example, about slavery in the New Testament. Why didn't God just outlaw slavery? And he didn't, actually. This is not something that he outlawed in the New Testament, saying slavery is now illegal. But here's what he did, and in some ways it's even more powerful. He changed our understanding of authority. So he said, masters that have slaves, you have to change the way you understand your position of authority as a master. And you have to see, first of all, your slave as not some inhuman, dehumanized person, but you have to see them as a fellow human being created by God with all the dignity and all the worth that you have. You're equal in that respect. And you actually have to serve them for their good. Okay, that completely upends the institution of slavery, and that's exactly what Paul did in his letter to Onesimus, and and so slavery then essentially over time just becomes abolished. So it's very interesting. God didn't again outlaw slavery, but he did redefine authority in a way that just totally revolutionized that institution.
Yep.
And you see this over and over again. I think of places where we've served, Dwight. One of the in the developing world, you see a lot of abuse of authority in tribal kind of contexts, or you see this in Asia. I remember in churches that I served at in Japan, there was a lot of abuse of authority. But where it's understood and practiced, it's one of the most powerful things for the flourishing of the development and the flourishing of that community that you can do, I would say, in some ways.
Yeah. It's interesting. I know we're not here to talk about that, but I do remember some situations where, it's like, I remember going into a context where there was very much direct control in this culture. And then to come in as an American, I could do no less than to say, well, the ultimate person here is the one that's working closest to the poor, closest to the most vulnerable child. And let's put as much decision-making into their hands and the resources they need, because ultimately that's where the rubber meets the road. And it's not about us, it's about them doing the best job possible, because they're the ones that are actually working with that poor widow and that poor child,
Exactly.
But it was revolutionizing that we would try to give power and control and resources and, to focus that far down the ladder,
Yes, to a group that was directly involved with the people they were serving. Yeah,
Anyway,
we don't practice this well even in the church, or we just don't. But when you do, you see it, like you said, Dwight. There, it becomes really powerful.
Yeah, it becomes revolutionary.
Absolutely.
Anyway, it was fun.
Yeah,
it was exciting.
Yeah, I think of a church that I visited Haiti several years ago, and I was trying to understand. There's such brokenness in that country, and there's a church there, and I was trying to understand what is it that is wrong. Why is it the church having more influence on shaping that culture? And one of the things that I heard that really grieved me, and this isn't true just of Haiti, this is true all over the world, but that pastors were reluctant to disciple their congregation, because if they were discipled, they would gain knowledge and practice, and then they might become a threat to their power. So they literally didn't disciple, and I thought, well, that's a huge problem here. Okay, if they're worried about hanging on to their position of authority and not willing to delegate it, and they don't understand authority as service for those under authority, you're not going to have a healthy church. If you're not going to have a healthy church, you're not going to have a healthy society. So I just remember being really struck by that. Yeah.
I think it's easy to talk and say, yes, we should all have this view of authority. But the other complication is that authority is usually tied to power over resources, over salaries.
Yes.
And it usually generates a degree of wealth and comfort and privilege that, and so there's this constant. I was thinking, what if we paid presidents the lowest in the company? Would they really aspire to be the president? No, they wouldn't. But there's this conflict because with authority usually comes privilege.
Yeah, that's correct. And here's the irony of that, Dwight, is then you get these really bad people in authority, right? You get these corrupt politicians or whatever it is, because that's what they want. They want the power, right?
And we see pastors that are fighting not to lose control because ultimately that's what they'll lose is privilege and a salary potentially.
Yes.
And it's true of all of us. We all have that.
Really good point there at the end, Dwight. This word authority is something that we all have positions of authority. So it's not us pointing fingers at, those bad politicians or those bad people in authority over there. Or, this is the application aspect of this, is you have to ask yourself, what positions of authority do you have? And how do you view it? Is it some kind of a prerequisite, a prerogative for you to kind of be comfortable, as you were saying, or, feel good about yourself, enrich yourself, exercise your authority over others, boss them around so that you're not bossed around, or whatever? What's your attitude about that authority? And is it true or is it false? If it's true, then it's a position of responsibility to serve those under your authority for their good, even to the point of you. It's to the point of you sacrificing your life if necessary for them. So if you're married, if you're a teacher, if you're an elder, whatever it is, if you're a parent, whatever that sphere of authority is, how are you exercising it? Because it has to start with you, right? It's not just saying, these guys over there, right? They're abusing authority. The question is always, how are you? This is a very applicable word.
Yeah. Scott, maybe this is putting you on the spot, but how have you thought through meekness in this definition of authority? Because meekness is another tribute or trait of Christ. He was meek.
Yes. Well, I think I'm going to turn that around to Luke, because I know you've done some thinking about this, Luke. This question of meekness and power. Yeah. How do you understand that?
Oh, now you're putting me on the spot.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love the word meek. Blessed are the meek. Put simply, I think the best definition I've heard of meekness is power under control, right? So it's the right use of power. I think of Gandalf when I think of meekness in Lord of the Rings. I think of a wizard who has the ability to zap the bad guys, right? But instead he controls it, and he's a background figure. He's Gandalf the Grey for most of the time, and he just walks around helping people out.
Yeah.
And meekness. I think of, again, your definition, I think, brings in meekness really well in the sense of it needs to be selfless. And that's where it comes in. That's the power under control. Because authority without meekness is, you think of superiority, you think of lording it over. With meekness is that ability to say, okay, yes, I do have power. That's part of my authority, but I'm gonna wield it very carefully.
Yes.
And I'm gonna only wield it. Or maybe don't. And when I do, it's only for the good of those I'm serving. But
it's so important what you said there. Look, you have the power, right? You could do it. I mean, so there's this kind of not a contradiction, but it's hard for us to get our heads around because it's real power, but it's clothed in humility and self-control.
I think of, And the thing is, you have to understand we're all in places of authority, but we have to understand that people thrive under authority when it's exercised right.
Yes.
We have to know that if we're in authority.
Oh,
We have to know that if I don't do my responsibility of my responsibility that God's given me here, then I am hurting those that I'm supposed to be serving.
Absolutely.
Because they thrive under it. It's a human default. We love to be under good authority.
Yes.
I think of when I was a kid, if I didn't have a parent that was looking out for me and exercising the first sentence here of your definition, that is the power and right to issue commands, rules, laws, and ensure that they are carried out. If we just read that sentence without selflessness in the picture, we think rules, yuck, commands, laws, whoa, enforcing, oh my goodness, this doesn't sound Christian at all, right? Aren't we just supposed to love? But we need those.
The boundaries, yeah.
And as a kid, if I didn't have a loving parent that was enforcing rules, commands, and laws, then I'd sit on the couch, watch TV every day, and eat sugar. And eventually I would realize, okay, this isn't working for me. And we see that with kids all the time that just don't have good authority in their life, and they go and they search for it, right? They go and join the high school football team because they need that authority structure.
Yeah, or the neighborhood gang or whatever it is, right? Yeah.
Or neighborhood gang. A lot of kids who grow up in broken households do really well in the military because they they desire that structure and they flourish under it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a really good example, Luke. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, if you're not exercising your authority well, then you're actually hurting people. And if we don't grasp that responsibility and, seek to do it well, then it's not that we're just missing out on an opportunity, but we're actually hurting the people that we're supposed to be, or, the whatever we are in authority over, we're hurting them.
If this is all the true definition of authority and we love it and we say, go for it, let's do it, why are we in love with the false definition, or why do we trend towards it, or what's?
Well, I think.
Why do we go the other direction, Scott?
Simply, Dwight, our fallen heart is selfish, right? Its inclination is self-serving, and not other-serving. So true authority is by its very nature other-serving, other-focused. It's focused on the good of others, but that's not our natural condition in this fallen world. We're selfish. Am I missing anything there, Dwight? Or what?
Yeah, the problem is we're selfish to the core.
Exactly.
Even when we think we're not being selfish, we're probably got some selfishness going on.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just thinking, how do we fix the world and authority, and it's to cure selfishness,
That's right. Yeah. Why don't we get into the false authority, because this is real, as you said, Luke, at the beginning. This is what most people understand. This is the world that we live in. This is our experience for the most part, is living under this false authority, which is, the way I define it, arbitrary, self-serving, often harsh and oppressive use of power or control, concentration of power or rule that's unaccountable to God, or any kind of constitutional limit, or the people under authority. It's not looking out for their good at all. This, I think, for a lot of people, this is how they understand authority, and rightly so, because this is real. This false authority is very often the authority that people see and experience in this fallen world. I think where it becomes really destructive is that if this is all it is, if all the goodness that we've talked about, is stripped out of authority, and it's just power and control for selfish, ends, it becomes an entirely negative concept. First of all, true authority is very positive because it leads to flourishing and thriving. But negative authority is entirely negative. And you get this kind of strange thing where people, I think of that, again, Lord of the Rings, but that famous line from Gollum in Lord of the Rings, he was, this negative authority is the ring of power in Lord of the Rings, right? It's this power to control, to dominate, right? And Gollum was so attracted to that power but he also loathed it and despised it. And so you see both of those in false authority. Like, this is a very negative concept. We view it very negatively because whoever's got it's going to abuse it at my expense. But then I need it. It's like I absolutely need it. Because if I don't have it, somebody else is going to, somebody's going to gore me, right? I've got to be the one in the position to gore you and not have you gore me, if you will. So that's the world that we live in. That's the way that we tend to think about authority in this fallen world. And again, for good reason, we've all experienced the pain of being under abusive authority, right? It's very real. Thoughts from you guys on that?
I could almost hear Gollum in your voice, Scott.
Thank you.
I hate it, but I need it. Yeah. I need it. Oh, I want it.
Yeah, yeah. You just crave it. It's like it becomes the highest good. In some ways, or the highest thing that you want. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to you, and I'm just thinking, and the more power you have, the more control you have, and the more control you have, the more controlled life is.
Mm-hmm.
And if it continues on to its zenith, you get, I guess, the Antichrist and everybody else under complete control.
Yes.
I mean, it leads to control and this sense of, I can't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
I can't be me. I can't, there's no liberty.
Mm-hmm.
There's no freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't breathe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what an awful world to live in, to think of, if you're thinking about authority and you're going, well, let's not worry about it. No, let's worry about authority, because bad authority leads to control where everybody can't breathe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I think, back to the church again, and, there's this word submit is related to the concept of authority, because submit means to submit to a rightful authority, to willingly obey, those commands that the rightful authority gives. And that's seen entirely negatively, and you especially see this, around discussions of Christian weddings, right? Women say, I don't want to be in a position of submission, that's very negative. And they've got a point there, because they've seen or experienced, the abuse of authority in the home. And so, but again, what's the solution to that? It's not to perpetuate these false things, but it's to recognize the good thing, the true authority, the true power, and to live that out. And that includes, being willing to submit to true or genuine authority, and actually being very glad to. The Bible speaks positively of submission as well, and we're all in positions of submission because we're all under authority at the same time that we have authority, so.
Yeah, my default on that one is that if there's tension in that relationship, it's because somebody's not isn't using authority rightly.
Correct.
If there's an abuse of authority, it'll be difficult to submit. I submitted to my parents because they were wonderful authorities. They really were. It wasn't hard to submit.
Yeah, you had that
you
had a really strong example in your family, Dwight.
If you've got good authority, it's pretty easy to submit because they're for your flourishing. But
again, a lot of people, I'm mindful that a lot of people have never seen that, Dwight, and just how much of a gift that is, that you had that example of real authority in your home. There's a whole lot of people who've virtually never seen that, which always just boggles my mind.
I'm thinking of a soccer team, Scott, where there's one person that's called to be the goalie. They're supposed to submit to the ball coming to them, and the other one's supposed to kick the ball and kick it into the other end zone's goal. And they're constantly looking at each other and criticizing each other for not doing their part. You're not submitting. Well, you're not actually attacking the goal correctly. And the Bible says, no, you worry about your role. I'm my message to men and women today is stay in your lane, play your role, and don't try to control your spouse's job. Whether it's anyway.
Yeah, and you're using that example in marriage. It could be in any role of authority and submission.
So many times we look at our spouse and say, well, you should be this way, because this is what the Bible says.
Or our boss, or whatever it is, right?
You worry about your role,
Correct. And I think that's the right way to do it, Dwight, is what is the true biblical role here of authority or submission? Let's redeem it. Let's do our best to understand it and to live it out. That really honors God. He's very pleased with that. And let's do that. Not that there's a time that we don't, have to confront abuse of authority. There is, right? In the home or otherwise. But I think you're right to say let's focus on, ourselves, our own lives, and our own roles. Are we, in a role of authority? How do we carry that out biblically in a true way? So,
and then there, and without denying that there's a command: submit to one another in love, submit to those in authority, submit to God. We're called to submit. Honor your parents. Honor your father and mother.
Yeah. I think this authority and submission, I think in the Bible, we're not encouraged to make those markers of our identity, but rather they're to be kind of hats, if you will, roles that you play, and you put them on and you take them off. But it doesn't shape who you are, right? You know what I'm saying? Yes, there are certain times when I have that role of authority. There's times when I have that role of submission. Often I have them both simultaneously, depending on the context. But it doesn't define me. Whereas I think in the fallen world, it moves in the opposite direction. In the fallen world, these kind of tend to become markers of identity. I am, this powerful authority or whatever it is. That defines me, And I think the Bible always kind of pushes back against that and says, no, that doesn't define you. That's a role that you can play, that you will play at different times, and you need to play it correctly.
I'm trying to keep up with you guys. This is a lot of good stuff here. And it's so counter just the way my brain thinks.
Yeah.
But it's like I'm trying to think of examples. I'm trying to, because it's so hard. I mean, the beginning of your definition, again, on the biblical side is the power or right to issue commands. You start out with power, and we always think of the word power, and we think of the catchphrase, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And power's bad. Synonyms for authority oftentimes for people are going to be abusive power, stepping on people, authority, authoritarian, right? So it's just so twisted.
Yeah.
And I'm having such a hard time just even during this discussion pulling myself away from that and remembering that we need to flip that upside down and think of it selflessly.
Go ahead, Dwight. Yeah.
Oh, Scott, I'm going to challenge you maybe.
What's
the role of the elections? We're having an election here in the United States in November. And elections are about putting people in authority and power, great power and great authority, both in the Senate and the House and everywhere. What is your message to the church in terms of how to vote in light of biblical authority?
Yeah.
Because it's all there. We've got, anyway.
And you got 30 seconds.
We got 30 seconds. Well, I have another thought.
Well, I got a couple thoughts on that, Dwight. I mean, one is that in our system of government, which I do think was heavily shaped by kind of biblical ideas, and here you see that our system of government, this constitutional form of Republican form of government, it vested the power. This is very interesting. It vested the power, ultimate power, in the people themselves. And this is really, the United States was the first country to do this. Up to that point, it was always vested in a king. It was top down. The United States says, we're going to turn that around and we're going to be bottom up, that we're going to vest. And the Constitution starts with those famous words, we the people, right? I mean, we are the rulers, so to speak, okay? And so then we select people to, we delegate authority to them, but it's a delegated authority from us in order to carry out these roles of leadership and creating order. But they're accountable, and they are accountable to us. So what does that mean for churches? I'm scandalized, quite frankly, Dwight, by the fact that in the United States, I think it's something like 30% of evangelical Christians don't vote. They don't vote. So what that means is that when we have a president or senators or whatever it is that we dislike, they're pro-choice, they're doing all sorts of abusive things, harmful things, we really have to say, we're to blame. Okay, we're to blame. In other words, if even half of that 30% voted biblical values of upholding the dignity of human beings and life and things like that, if even half of them did, we would have different outcomes in these elections. So we often say in church, I hear this very often, oh, we're so grateful for the freedom to worship as we want. And at the same time, you hear this very same people often say, oh, I don't want to get involved in politics. Well, I'm saying that freedom came from politics. That came from being people actively engaging in the political sphere. It didn't just drop from heaven, and it came because of decisions that people made, and it can go away as well. So again, I just want to urge people in this country, in our country, any country that vests power in the people. You don't point to someone else and say, oh, you've got to exercise authority correctly. That's our job. We are vested with authority in this country, and we've got to, at a minimum, the bare minimum is vote, right? Okay, so that's my little rant on that, encouraging people to vote.
Did you have another point?
I think we can get confused with voting too, and all the policies and the, you can get just so deep into all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But as Christians, vote on your principles, vote on your values. We say that a lot. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? That means that we're releasing this book soon on 10 words to heal our broken world. They can heal a broken world. Look at the definitions of the people you're voting into positions of authority hold. It's usually pretty easy, too, by the way, to figure out what people believe about these words.
Yes.
It comes out in their speech. It comes out in the way they act and the decisions they make. So, what's their view of authority? You can figure that out pretty quick, Luke, by listening to a politician talk. And if they're promoting a biblical view of authority, most likely they won't, but maybe they will. That'd be great. That's a good sign. What's their view on love? What's their view on marriage? What's their view on freedom?
Or even more powerfully, politicians especially can say the right things, but Jesus' advice is really helpful here. You'll know them by their fruit. So look at their track record, and I would say look at their track record in terms of just two things. You can look at a lot of things, but number one, when they have authority, do they tend to centralize it? Is that their kind of default? We want to centralize power. Or do they want to share and humbly, delegate power to states, to families? I mean, is that the direction they're moving in? Okay. I would choose the person who's going to delegate power, right, as opposed to the person who's going to centralize power. And you can see that from a track record. And then are they using that power and authority to serve especially the weakest and the most vulnerable? And you see this on the issue of abortion, right? The weakest and the most vulnerable are the unborn in our country. So how are they using that? Are they using it to destroy, or are they using it to sacrificially serve? What's their track record? They'll say whatever, but what's their track record on those things? So
it's deceptive too, because they'll often say the Bible answers.
That's
because
right.
We live in a nation that's so encultured by the Bible that we all love to hear things that sound biblical. I'm for love, and we're like, oh, love's biblical. Right. I love it. Right. Great. So that is confusing if you just listen to what people say and you don't look at their fruit. Oftentimes they'll sound, honestly, pretty Christian in the way that they promote themselves, at least in the U.S.
But look
you got to look a little deeper than that.
Yeah. What were you going to say something, Dwight?
Oh, I think that was a great summary. You could say that 2 or 3 times. I think it's so clear. I would add one more, and that is an authority that looks down the road and sees danger ahead. And even though we don't see it yet, that person does and says, I'm going to start working with that danger because somebody's got a bit of a long-range vision. And
true leadership in that respect.
Right? It's just interesting to look at our current political situation, and both are really complaining about the other one's authority. One says, if you elect that person, you will get all the authority will be, in that one person.
Yeah,
and
authoritarian is the word that people use a lot,
authoritarianism.
right?
And the other, then that candidate fights back and says, no, but if you elect that person, then the party is going to control you, and the state's going to control you, and so they're both saying there's an abusive power coming. Don't elect them. Elect me.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
But
yeah,
somebody just present a positive picture of authority and power, and I'll probably vote for you. You know.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that this warning of authoritarianism, you can't, again, it's because people see authority entirely negatively.
Yeah.
But then again, if they have the power, they know too that that's how they'll exercise it, and they just can't. They just can't. They can't allow someone else to have that power. It's the ring of power again. And Luke, this gets to, you were asking about power. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton or whoever said that, that famous quote. And I do think that's true in a fallen world. And this is where this is where we need God, to have that ultimate authority. God is the only one who's powerful enough to hold the ring, if you will. And he delegates it to us, and we understand that it's a delegated authority. It's a delegated power, and we're accountable for how we use that. We're going to exercise it in a completely different way. So Lord Acton was correct in a fallen world, let's say. But in a biblical framework, when we understand that our authority and power is delegated and we're accountable to God, he's going to hold us to account for how we exercise it. It's going to be exercised in a different way. I think, again, Lord of the Rings, sorry, we keep coming back to that, but remember there's that famous scene with Gandalf, right, where, he's being offered at the beginning the ring, right? Frodo says, here, you take it. And he says, no, I would try to use this authority, this power for good, but I can't even wield this, right? I'm not powerful enough to wield this. Through me it would do incredible evil,
Yeah, I think of the Old Testament kings, right? And you saw a lot of them take the ring, and they wanted the power and authority, and things would fall apart quick. And then you saw other kings, and they took, in a way, they grasped the authority, and they immediately handed it back to God, and they tore down the high places and the idols and stuff, and they went into like a time of mourning and fasting and giving up the evil and accepting the authority, but giving it to God and saying, God, how can you use this authority through me? And that's just a good picture of when we get authority, it's not something to shy away from, but it's something to submit to God and say, use this in me properly, or else it will devolve into power and corrupting power.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about we live in a fallen world and we're basically selfish, and that's why the world looks at authority and says it's bad and power is bad.
That's right.
But you just reminded me that Jesus said, I have all authority and I'm giving that to you. So in a sense, he is actually entrusting his authority and his power to us as human beings through his Spirit. And, when you think about that's dangerous power, but we can wield it because of him.
That's right.
Because he never wielded it poorly and wrongly. So there's this interesting dance that he's, not only is he raising us children to let us free at 18, he's saying, no, you're going to actually have my Spirit. It's amazing. We have a lot more authority and power than we know we have, and it's a good thing.
And to exercise it wisely and truly is probably one of the most transforming things we can do. We talk about the power of truth to transform culture, whether that culture is our family or our city or our nation. Exercising authority truly is one of the most powerful things. I mean, all of these words have the power when they're exercised correctly to bring about positive change. This one really does. Really does. Yeah.
It looks like courage and leadership and
sacrifice.
Laying
down your life for the good of others. Yep, absolutely. It's amazing. It's amazing.
We need to start wrapping up for today, but we've been talking about this for 5 minutes now, but as some final takeaway points, how can we as Christians recover this true definition and live it out in our lives? You gave a couple examples there. Do we have any more before we wrap up?
Well, I think you were right, Luke. I think we're all so deeply shaped by the fallen world understanding of authority, and that's true for Christians as well, that we haven't even fully seen, what this looks like truly. And I think it's really important. Start with that. Just start by really deeply reflecting on what this is, what the true definition of it is, and how it's been modeled, especially by Jesus. I mean, he really is the one that we want to look to here as our model for this. And then you seek to say the next question is, how can I demonstrate that kind of authority the way he did in my positions of authority? What needs to change? How does that need to change? Both my attitude and my practice. So I would like to, I have to do this. I do this all the time because, and again, this isn't something you do just once. We all have that fallen heart, right? I mean, I'm constantly challenged, right, to kind of just in a little way use those positions. And I do sometimes, for my own benefit. So where are you, where do you need to change? I mean, that's the question we have to ask. And how do, and again, maybe some motivation here will be, you will be held to account. God will, it's a delegated thing, and he will hold you to account. Think about the day you're going to stand before him and give an answer. That might motivate you a little bit.
The fear of God. Thank you, Scott.
That's called the fear of God. That's why it's a bit of a big deal, actually, Yeah, no,
we delight in the fear of the Lord. There we go.
All
right, let's delight in that.
We need that. What about you guys? What thoughts do you have on that kind of practical application? Okay, none. Good. Well, good.
No, Scott, you said it well. Thank you. I'm not going to add to that. That's a good wrap.
Yeah. That is a good wrap. And that was a really fun discussion. Thanks, guys. Really helpful. I hope this was helpful for everyone listening as well. And like we said earlier, this word affects a couple of the other words in this list. It might affect all of them, really.
They all go together.
But this word is really important to remember, that we all have authority. And it's so easy to point at other authority structures that we don't like and tell them to fix up their,
get their act together.
Get their act together, exactly. But we have to remember at the same time, we also have positions of authority, and we should start with ourselves and try to live it out, the biblical definition of authority in our own lives, in their own realms of authority, whatever that is, even if it's just authority over your cat. So we can all do that.
No, it's true. And cats are in the news right now, but
all
actually, I think just to add one quick thought, because I think your point's really good there, Luke. There's a lot in the Bible, in the New Testament, on elders in the church and that position of authority in the church, which is really an important position. Dwight, you're an elder in your church right now, and it's a really important one. There's a lot of qualifications, and they tend to have to do with, have you practiced authority in the smaller sphere faithfully? If you have, then you can be entrusted to have this position of authority in greater things. And I think that's a very important biblical message. So just like you're saying, start with that most basic level. The authority that you have maybe over your own pets, right? If you're a kid, start there, and then you can learn what authority is, and then you can exercise it correctly in larger spheres of influence or responsibility, all the way up. So.
That's great. Guys, as we continue in this series, we have a couple episodes left, but we're getting close to the book launch date. 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World will be out on November 19th. So we're excited to bring that to you. In the meantime, if you want to learn all things 10 Words to Heal Our Broken World, head to 10wordsbook.org. You can spell that TEN or the number 10, 10wordsbook.org. On that page, you can find all things 10 words. Right at the top of the page right now, we have a Join Our Launch Team section that you'll see when you head to the page. If you want to join the launch team, there's only 100 spots on that launch team, and they are filling out fast. So don't want to rush you there too much, but I would suggest getting over there pretty quick and filling out the sign-up form. All you guys need to do is just give us your email and your name. And then, unfortunately for this, you have to be a resident of the U.S. or Canada in order to do this. But what you get to be on the launch team is you will get a free copy of the book, an early released free copy of the book. And in return, we will just ask you to give an Amazon review when the book comes out. Other reviews would be great, as well as on Goodreads or wherever you get your books. But that Amazon review will help us a lot in getting this book out to more people. So we would encourage you to sign up for the launch team. Again, those spots are filling up fast. So go over there, sign up today, 10wordsbook.org. We also have coming out with this book a study guide, which we're excited to share with you guys. That is going to be based off a video series that my dad put together. A video series where he goes through each one of these words in about 10-minute videos and lays out, like we did today, in a much more concise manner, the true definition, the false definitions, and the lives and cultures that those will produce. And then there's going to be the study guide that goes with that. And if you'd like to take your small group through that or your church through that, you can also find that on 10wordsbook.org. It's not out yet, but it will be about the time of the release of the book. So November 19th is that date. Keep that in mind. And in the meantime, you can get your free copy if you join the launch team. And we'll continue to bring these episodes to you guys. I hope that you are sharing these with your friends and helping us spread the message. We really appreciate that. In the meantime, if you would like to help support this podcast, the easiest way that you can do that is by heading to the podcast app that you're currently using and just giving this show a rating and review. We always appreciate those, and those really help us just continue to grow the show and bring on awesome guests as we do every once in a while. So we'd encourage you to do that. And for today, that's it. Dad, Dwight, thank you for your time. Really enjoyed it.
Been
Great
fun
to be with you, Luke. Yep.
Yeah, and to our listeners, thanks again for listening to another episode of Ideas Have Consequences. This is the podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance.